Hey everybody, welcome to this Avid tutorial. What this video is going to focus on is the basics of just editing within Avid, kind of using the interface and moving clips around and the usual kind of basic editing stuff that you're doing. If you're watching this, I'm going to assume you're familiar with Premiere or Final Cut or some other editors, so have some idea of the editing process and really just kind of need a primer on how does Avid itself work and kind of the unique ways you may need to do things in there compared to other editors. We're not going to cover creating a project or importing media or exporting media. I have other tutorials on all of that stuff. So this is really just going to be about the interface and when you have your footage in there, how you actually work with it and get it to do what you want it to do. So quick look at the kind of overview here of what we're seeing. On the right here, you can see there's different workspaces. So you can go into a coloring workspace, an effects workspace, audio, or editing, which is where we're going to start. And all of these, I'll note, are customizable. I also have a customization and settings video that will go through how to do those. So you can get each of them kind of set up the way you want. But the editing one, the default look is going to be something similar to this. Mine might be slightly different. But it's going to show over here, I'll maybe have some space, and this is where I'm going to find my bins and information about the project. Down here at the bottom is going to be my timeline. And then here I have two different windows called the source and the record size that are really all one giant window called the composer. And so the look of this is very similar to Premiere if we're used to that, except in Premiere, these are kind of two separate tabs. And in here, they're grouped into one piece. So this window is called the composer. And first thing you might want to notice is, I'll talk about this in the importing tutorial as well. But in Avid, everything has to live inside bins. So if you're used to working in Premiere or Final Cut, you can create bins. They look like folders. And in fact, in Premiere, the icon is a folder. It's essentially the same thing. The terminology is just a little different because Avid's coming out of the film workspace where you actually had bins full of film. And Premiere came out of a digital workspace where you had folders with media in it. Either way, they do the same thing. They're a method of organization. What you can't do in Avid is, so here's sort of the root of my project. I can't just throw media directly into here. Everything has to go inside a bin. Now I can put bins inside folders. So you can see here, I actually have a folder that's holding several different bins inside it. And that's okay. But I can't actually take a clip. If I tried to grab this and like drag it over here, it won't let me do it. So that's just something to be aware of. The other thing, there's a tutorial on this, the sort of bin interface here, but this is something that changed, or I think in 2019, where Avid kind of changed the look of how bins and these, what they call bin containers, are set up. And it allows you to do some cool things. It can be a little perplexing the first time you're doing it, kind of getting things to go where you want. So like if I took this and you can see there's kind of two different bins inside here. I can switch between them that way. I could also kind of grab this whole thing and pull it out here, and now it kind of floats by itself as its own window. Or I can kind of lock it in place here by dragging it to one of these sort of highlighted spaces. You can see if I drag it up here, it says, hey, I'm going to lock this in position here, and now it's part of the same window, and it's going to make everything else sort of fit around that. I'm just mentioning that because it's something that can be a little bit confusing as you're kind of moving between things, because you can float any of these windows. So I could take this and sort of put it out here. And that allows you to sort of move them wherever you want. And if I had like a dual screen setup, I can move some things onto a different screen. But it also means that some things end up behind other things and such. So there are ways around that. I'm not going to get into that hugely here, but just wanted to point this out. And for now, I'm going to lock this kind of back over where it was. And you can see this actually did create something that wasn't exactly what I wanted to do. Now I've got this going across the whole thing here. So I'm going to move that up there and close my effect palette and get back to kind of this view. Okay. So anyway, here's my bin containers, and there's a little slidey bar here. You can see over on the left, it's showing me all the sort of folders and the sort of root level of the project thing I have here. And then over here, it can show me individual bins within those. So right now I have two bins open. I have my timelines and I have all my footage. And you can organize these different ways if you want. So I could this out and open up that bin here and float it down there and kind of organize this in whatever way I would like and is convenient for me. I personally tend to like, whoops, just close my timelines. I tend to like this setup where they're just sort of tabbed here, but you can do that however you want. Okay, then over here we got the composer, source window, record window, and my timeline. You'll notice I had some stuff up in my timeline that also showed up in the record window over here. When I closed the timeline that was open, when I closed the bin that was in, this stuff disappeared. So you have to have the bin open that has a timeline in it to view that timeline. So if I, let's say, open up this timeline here, this sequence, and I close this bin that has that inside it, it's going to close that sequence as well. So that's just something important to be aware of. So a couple icon things. You can see here this thing that looks like a little single frame of film. That is a clip. That's what all my video clips are going to look like. This thing here that looks like a waveform is an audio clip. So that means this has audio only. In this case, this has video only. I can see my tracks here. This has one video track, no audio. This has one audio track, no video. And then these things that look like it kind of looks like a sideways ladder, but it's supposed to be 3 frames of film running sideways. I guess this is IMAX film since it's running sideways. These are sequences. So that's a place where I've put together a number of clips. So let's say we came into a project and we just want to start out some basic editing. First thing I want to do is make myself a new sequence. So I'm going to Command-Shift-N to create a sequence, and it's going to create that in the bin that I had highlighted. If I had my timeline or composer window highlighted, it's going to ask me what bin I want to put that in. And I'll give this a name, say my practice editing. And I would normally also put a date on this. I like to date my sequences. So let's say this is, I don't know what date it is. Let's say it's August 26, 2020. So I'll put that in. And so that's now open here and it's empty. And you can see it has video, a timecode track, and a couple of audio tracks kind of ready to go. And I can add more audio and video tracks as I need. So now I got that sequence. I want to put some footage into it. So this process should be familiar from Premiere or Final Cut or wherever else you're coming from. And Avid is going to work pretty much the same. There's a couple little quirks to it that I want to point out, but the basic process of kind of throwing together a sequence is very similar. So I'm going to open up a clip. I can do that by just double clicking, or if I have that clip highlighted, I can hit the return key and that will also bring it up. One thing you'll notice in Avid is that you can do almost anything with keyboard shortcuts. It's really designed to allow you to not have to use the mouse very much, because that does sort of slow you down over the course of a day. And you know, if you save 1/10 of a second on every little thing you do, but you're doing 1,000 things over the day, you start saving real time. Okay, so I got a clip here and I can drag my cursor through it to look at it just like I could in Premiere. The same play controls will also work. So I can hit L to play forward. I can hit J to play backwards. I can hit K to pause it. Just like in Premiere, I can hit L multiple times to play forward at a higher speed, or J multiple times to play backwards at a higher speed. And you'll see right down here when I'm doing that, it'll tell you how many frames per second I'm playing it at. So this is 2997, or essentially 30 frame footage. So when I'm playing normally, it's playing normal speed. If I hit it again, it goes up to 60. If I hit it again, 90, and then 150. So same thing if I hit J a bunch of times, it was playing backwards, and you saw sort of the max speed was 240, so that's playing back at sort of 8 times real speed. Okay, so I can go through this and kind of find where I want it to start. Let's just say it's here. I'll hit I to mark an in point, just like any other editor, and say that looks great. I'll hit O to mark an out point. Okay, now what you can do is I can grab this clip and just drag it down here, just like any other editor again. We're going to find pretty quickly that's not really the ideal way to work in Avid. Like I said, it's really designed to let you do things with keyboard shortcuts, and you end up kind of having more freedom and control over what you're doing working with the keyboard shortcuts than with the mouse. You always can drag things, like that will work, but it's going to be a lot faster and kind of set us up for working the way Avid kind of wants us to work if we start learning our keyboard shortcuts. So I have 2 options here for put this into the sequence, and those are my Overwrite and Splice-In or insert modes. And the shortcuts for these are V to do an insert, V as in van, or B as in boy to do an overwrite. So in this case where I have nothing else in my clip, it's not in my sequence, it's not going to matter. So I'll just throw that in, and let's grab another clip and throw something in here. Okay, let's just get this little piece here. Great. I am not trying to make an edit that makes any sense here. We're just sort of demoing. And okay, sure. Let's grab this piece here. Okay, so now I got 3 clips in my timeline, and you can see they all had a video track and 2 audio tracks. I'll also note that it has this timeline track in the middle, kind of showing the time code of where we're at. If I want to move that, I can hold down the Option key. You'll notice this turns into a hand, and I can just drag that down and say, hey, I want this at the bottom. I want to keep my video and audio together. Or if you like it kind of separating them as this sort of visual break between the video and audio, you could do that. You could do this with any of the other tracks too. So if I wanted to, like, for some reason, move my audio 1 track below audio 2, I can do that. And the other thing the Option key is going to let me do is if I need to resize a track. So let's say, I'm not going to do this in an intro video, but I started working with some audio and I need to see my track higher so I can see the audio levels and stuff on it. I can hold down Option, kind of go to this border between here, and you'll see I can kind of stretch that out. And when I start getting into editing audio, I'll be able to see some things in here. For now, I don't need that, so let's just shrink that back down a little bit. Okay, so I got some clips in here. Let's go back to this overwrite versus insert or splice in option here. And let me find a clip I haven't used yet. Let's try this. Okay, so let's say I want to grab this little piece of here. And if you want to see how long this is, I can drag it in here and you can kind of see what it is. And I could, of course, drag it and drop it in here somewhere. And what I'd like you to notice what I'm doing right now is if I drop this in, it's going to drop it as an overwrite. So it's going to, whatever was already here is just going to kind of disappear. This is going to take its spot. So if you look at the overall length of the timeline and where the cuts are, I drop that in, and it actually tried to, there we go. Kind of dropped it in the middle here, and just part of this shot 122-1 just got erased. It got covered up. That's an overwrite edit. So if I do the same thing here and I click on the overwrite button, or I'm just going to hit B for boy, which is my overwrite button, you can see it drops that in, and it's going to start it right where the cursor is, right where the playhead in my timeline is. If I do an insert or a splice in, what that's actually going to do is instead of kind of covering up or overwriting this footage that's here, it's going to shove all of this stuff forward to make room. So it's literally going to insert it between things. If we look at my overall sequence here, you can see right now it's a little over 50 seconds long. If I hit V as in van to do this insert, if you watch carefully, you can see it actually stretches things out a little bit. My sequence gets a little bit longer, and it's pushing this other stuff forward. In fact, you can maybe see it better if I do something like this. So let's say now I have this very short clip here. So I could drop this and literally that clip that was here disappears because I overwrote over its whole length. So there's overwrite over its whole length. This 122-1 bit just went away. If I do it as an insert instead, you can see it shoved that piece forward. So it's making my sequence longer. You have the same functionality in Premiere, and some of you have probably already used it. This is built into all editors, have some way to do one or the other of these. The reason I'm making a little bit of a big deal about it here is in Avid, it turns out to be really important to think about how you're doing it, because basically everything you do is going to be done in either an insert mode or an overwrite mode. And depending on which of those modes you're in, it's going to make a difference what actually happens to your sequence. So for example, you'll notice when I drag this down here, it did it as an overwrite. Well, the reason for that is because right now I'm in overwrite mode. And you can tell because when I move my cursor over here, it's a red arrow, and that matches the red arrow here. Anytime you see something red in Avid, that probably means it's something to do with an overwrite or an overwrite mode. Anytime you see yellow, it probably means it's a splice in or insert mode. So if I went into insert mode instead, like this, so now my arrow's yellow, and I tried to drag this down here, you can see now what it's doing, and it's kind of showing you how it would shove stuff. So it looks a little weird as I'm moving it, but you'll notice nothing's ever disappearing. It's just kind of changing where that is and pushing things around. So if I sort of move this, here, let me I'm going to look at this shot here, this 122-1. So I'm kind of coming right before it right now. If I start to scoot forward, you'll see what it's doing is it's actually splitting it, and part of it's going before the clip and part of it's going after the clip. So none of that footage is actually going anywhere. I'm stretching out the sequence to make room for everything. Okay, by the way that I switch that is with my E and R buttons. So E, as in elephant, is to turn on and off my insert mode, and you can see that toggling right over here. R is to turn on and off my overwrite mode. So if I have one of these on, that tells how things are going to work. If I don't have either one on, it will let me drag this down here, and by default, it's going to jump into overwrite mode. So you can see when I did that, but the default is to sort of do it as an overwrite. I can actually have both modes on. So if I press E and R, I get this sort of split red and yellow arrow. And now if I were to drag something down here, and again, I don't usually drag stuff. I'm usually using my keyboard. It's going to default back to overwrite. But it will make a difference that I have both on for some things that I might do within my sequence. And I'll get to that in just a little bit. But so that's the basic way we put things in here. Just like any other editor, I can set in and out point. I can drag it down here, or I can just hit my B button or my V button and overwrite or insert respectively that clip into there. And I can build up my sequence that way. Okay. The other thing that turns out to be very important in Avid that does exist in most other editors, but it's kind of hidden, or I think for lack of a better phrase, they kind of protect the user from it. Like it's kind of going on in the back end, but most of the time the editor is just going to kind of guess what it thinks you're trying to do and not make you worry about this, is my track panel selector over here. So what these are, and again, this is something that exists in all editors, but turns out to be really important in Avid, the way the interface is built, where it doesn't make so much of a difference in most other editors. This tells me which tracks are active. So let me clear this menu for a second. So I'm just looking at my sequence here. And you can see it says I have video, 2 audios. Right now they're all highlighted. I could turn these off on and off if I want to. And this is saying anything I do is going to affect the highlighted tracks and not other tracks. So for instance, let's bring a clip back up here. And I'll give myself a little in and out and say I have something I want to put in here. You'll notice when I opened up a new clip in the source window, source, record, and just like in any other editor, the record window is showing me the same thing that's being built in my timeline down here. So if I scroll through here, you also see it scrolling over here. It's just 2 different views of the same thing. When I loaded up a clip in my source monitor, something that I'm considering putting into my sequence, I got another set of panels over here, and this is showing what's available in here. So it's saying this clip also has 1 clip of video and 2 pieces of audio. Most of the stuff you're probably familiar, that you've been working with, probably looks similar to that, but that's not a necessity. It is possible to have things that have other tracks. So here's, for instance, something that just has video, and you'll see just the video clip pulls up. Here's something that's just 1 track of audio. So it just comes up 1 audio over here. So this is basically a little patch bay that allows me to tell different tracks where they're going into. So let's go back here and get myself that clip again. Okay. I said that which of these are turned on makes a difference in terms of what things happen to. So let me show you an example of that. Let's say that I turned off these 2 audio tracks. So these are turned off now. So that's saying whatever I do to this sequence right now is going to affect the video 1 track because it's turned on, but it's not going to affect these because they're turned off. So I'm just going to do a simple overwrite edit of this clip. So it's going to go in right where my playhead is here, and it's going to drop that clip in and overwrite the footage that's already here. So I'll press B. And you'll notice what happened here is it overwrote that clip onto the video track, but it didn't do anything to the audio track. These are turned off, so it left them alone. So it's doing exactly what I would expect it to do. Here's where I can run into trouble, is if I don't have all my tracks on and something I'm doing is only affecting some of the tracks, then tracks are going to move and change differently if I do anything that changes the length of my timeline. So let's say instead of doing an overwrite edit, I just wanted to do an insert edit here, splice in. So thinking ahead, what we should expect to happen is that clip is going to get inserted into this video track. It's going to have to shove all this other stuff forward, but these audio tracks are turned off, so nothing's going to happen to them. So what's going to happen is all this audio later on down the road here is going to stay where it is, but all the video that went with it is going to move forward. So basically every part of my movie after this moment is going to be out of sync. And if I do that, you'll see that's exactly what happens. Now, Avid at least is nice enough to give me these little indicators showing that things are out of sync by 39 frames, as it turns out. That's what it's telling me. So it does give me a visual indication, but you can see how easy it is to get something, unintentionally out of sync if I'm not paying attention to these track selectors. And this is where Avid is going to give you a lot of freedom, but it's also going to kind of give you a lot of responsibility that comes with it. If you do something like this in Premiere, where I want to, drag a track in, unless you sort of go to the trouble of like manually locking these tracks and there's a big lock that shows up on them, unless you kind of go out of your way, it's very hard to accidentally throw your project out of sync. In Avid, it's super easy, right? I hit a button there, my project just went out of sync. Avid is going to kind of assume you know what you're doing and just let you do it and not give you a lot of warnings rather than kind of hand-holding you. Now, the nice part about that is it makes it very easy to kind of do anything you want. You're never kind of working against it or, wait, I got to go lock this track or turn off some linking or something to do this weird thing I'm trying to do. But it does mean that some of the just basic things you're doing, like dropping some clips in and trying to keep everything in sync, you have to keep a little head on your shoulders and make sure you know what you're doing. Now, there is here to this particular problem, these things called sync locks, and I can either click on the time code in the bottom and it's going to then highlight all tracks, or I could just select specific tracks and say, video one and audio one, I want to try to keep these in sync. Let's see what happens if I do the same thing now and I push insert. Okay, so what you'll see happen is Avid said, oh, these are supposed to stay in sync. Now you said you don't want to put anything new into this track, but if I don't put something in, you just added this new video, this audio is all going to go out of sync. So I'll just add in some empty space here. Meanwhile, on track A2, which is also turned off and which has the sync lock off, it leaves everything where it was. And so you can see V1 and A1 went out of sync with A2 here. You can see these are all shoved a little bit forward. So in this case, it worked. Probably. It kept these things in sync, so it accomplished what I was telling it to do. I may not have actually wanted it to put in black space here because that's why I turned this track off. I didn't want anything to happen to there. So it's kind of overriding my decision a little bit there with the sync lock. I'll also tell you the sync locks are not infallible. It's 100% possible to get your project out of sync doing certain things, even with the sync locks on. So they're like a little bit of a safety net, but not foolproof. I personally find it's a better solution to just pay attention to what I'm doing and try to make sure that everything goes as I'm planning it to. But if you're worried about something like that, you can turn these on and it does give you a little bit of a safety net. Okay, so that's the track selectors here and what those are doing. And there's a quick way to access these, which is on your keyboard, kind of the top right panel. So the number 8 is your video track. The number 7 is your video 2 track, if I had one. And then just to the right of that, 9, 0, the minus key, and the equal sign are your audio toggles. So 9 and 0 are audio 1 and audio 2. And they're just toggles. So every time I hit it, if it's off, it's going to turn it on. If it's on, it's going to turn it off. And just so we can see, let me give us a couple more tracks. So I'm going to do Command Y to create a new video track. You can see that made a V2 here. And Command U creates new audio tracks. So I made a couple of those, and let me put this time code back here at the bottom. Okay, so now you can see if I do 9, 0, minus sign, equal sign, toggles those tracks. And then number 7 is for track V2, number 8 is for track V1. And you saw some other things changing here as I did that. So let's talk about that. Quick shortcut that's very handy to know with this tracks turning on, off and on stuff. And you might be thinking right now, well, I'll just never turn those tracks off. I'll leave them all on. The problem is there's certain things you're going to do that are going to turn them off without you necessarily noticing. So you do got to kind of pay attention to them. A lot of times this is happening if you're in trim mode trying to tweak a particular shot, depending on where the cuts are. And, if you had maybe a piece of music that didn't have a cut at the same piece as your clips did, some tracks might get turned off and things like that. So you do need to keep an eye on it, even if you're not intentionally toggling them. Okay, key shortcut. Command A turns all your tracks on, just that easy. So if I'm about to do something and I just want to make sure all my tracks are on, I don't even usually have to look down here. I'll just Command A and make sure they're on, and then go ahead and hit whatever I was going to do. Command Shift A does the opposite, turns all your tracks off. So this can be particularly handy if maybe you have a project with a whole bunch of tracks and you're like, I'm just working on this one track. Okay, well, let me turn, so they're all on. Let's say I just want to do something with my video 1 track. Command Shift A, I'll turn them all off, and then I'll hit 8 to just turn on the video 1 track, and now I just have that one on, rather than trying to go through and manually turn off each one individually. Okay, so let's turn them all back on. What's happening over here, remember these are showing you what tracks are available in this source clip. And again, it's showing me I have 1 video track and 2 audio tracks. Because this is kind of like a patch panel, this is saying, where do I want those to go? So right now I'm saying whatever's in the V1 track of this, put it into the video 1 track of my sequence. Whatever's in the A1 track right now is going into A4. Let's put it back into A1 and kind of keep it there. And I'll put A2 back into A2. And to do this, I'm just sort of clicking on this. And if I hold down my click, it'll bring up some options and I can pick which one I want it to go in. Or you can just sort of draw an arrow with it and say I want it to go there. And you notice when I did that, it actually turned off these tracks by default. So I'm going to Command A and get everything back on. So here's my default. Video 1 goes to video 1, audio 1 goes to audio 1, audio 2 goes to audio 2. I could do something different. Let's say I wanted to splice in this bit of video, but I want to keep both this original audio that was here and this audio from my incoming clip. Well, that's easy enough to do. I'll drag these down here, and there's a faster way to do it, but so you can kind of see what I'm doing. Let's stick with that for now. Okay, now let's think about what's going to happen if I go to put this clip in. Whatever I do is going to affect the active tracks and not the inactive tracks. So video 2 is turned on, but there's nothing feeding into it. So whatever I'm going to do is just going to put emptiness into V2. I got my video 1 track going into video 1, so whatever this clip is here, the video of it, is going to overwrite whatever's here. Tracks A1 and A2 are turned off, so whatever I do is not going to affect them at all. Tracks A3 and A4 are on, and this over here is feeding into them. So the first audio channel from this clip is going to go into A3. The second one's going to go into A4. I'll hit B to do my overwrite. And it does kind of exactly what you'd expect. So here's my video clip. Here's the audio that got laid in with it. There are all sorts of different ways you can, mix things up with this, depending on what you're trying to do. And again, a lot of this is about giving you the flexibility to do kind of anything you want. The challenge of that is sometimes it makes it a little trickier if everything you're doing is very simple and you don't need all that extra power. It's kind of there regardless, and in some cases it's meaning you're having to pay a little more attention. Where something like this can come in handy is, imagine if I had been editing a bunch of sequences separately for different parts of a movie, and they all have different numbers of video and audio tracks. There might be some things I want to keep, some things I want to not bring from one to another. And in my patch panel here, I can really control all that very precisely. So it can be a little overwhelming when you get started with it. And my advice would be, as you're starting out, if you just want to always leave everything on and leave everything going, from one track into the next, that'll work. Now, if I do an overwrite here, what's going to happen is these are going to go exactly where I expected them to go. What's going to happen with V2, A1, and A2 is they're active, they're turned on, so it's going to put something into them, but there's nothing feeding into them. So it's going to put emptiness into them. So if I do an overwrite, you can see what happened here in A1 and A2. It overwrote empty space into here because they're saying, hey, we're turned on, you're doing an overwrite, take whatever's over here, which is emptiness, and put it in there. I can actually do something similar if I turn this off, because these can be toggled on and off as well. And I do an overwrite, what it's going to say is, okay, I got to put something in V1. What's over here? Nothing. It doesn't see this because it's turned off, so it's going to put empty space in there as well. Okay, that was a lot on all of these track things. It's something, it's a little much when you first get started. You play with it a little bit and you figure it out pretty quickly. Okay, so now I got everything back, V1 to V1, A1 to A1, A2 to A2. Last thing I'd like to show in this kind of, introductory, just getting us started, is the trim mode. So let's say that I want to tweak exactly kind of where this cut comes in, right? Let's go to one that's maybe a little more interesting. This is something you deal with a lot, right? You're trying to fix the continuity or the rhythm of something, and you're looking at exactly like, well, what's happening in this shot going to this shot? Maybe something doesn't quite match the way I want. I'm going to hit the U button, as in umbrella, and it brings up my trim window, which if I'm not paying attention, if I just walked in here and looked, this looks a lot like what I had before, right? I got my timeline here, or I got 2 video clips up here. It looks like my source and record window, but it's not. Here's my source and record where I have kind of 2 separate, I have play controls over here, I have play controls over here, I have information about what this clip is, information about what this clip is. I go into trim mode, and now I just have one set of controls kind of spread across this, and I have these 2 little pink numbers here in the middle, and I also have my cut highlighted in pink. Anytime I see this sort of pink, that's telling me that I'm dealing with my trim mode. And you can see if I move up here, this changes from, it's a little hard to see, looks like a sort of roll with film coming out both sides, or film just coming out the left, or film just coming out the right. And what that's doing is it's telling me I'm in trim mode right now, and it's saying, okay, which side of this cut am I trimming? So right now what I'm looking at is on the left side here, I got the very last frame of this shot. If I go out of trim mode, you can see the last frame of that shot is this. The first frame of the next shot is this. So when I go into trim mode, that's what I'm seeing. I'm seeing exactly, if I line these pictures up in the order they're going to play in the movie, what's happening right at this cut. And then I can say, okay, actually I want this cut to be a little later. So I want to extend the end of this shot a little bit, and I want to shorten the beginning of this shot a little bit. So I'm going to keep the overall length of my movie the same, but I'm going to lengthen this shot out and shorten this shot. And you can see I can trim like that. I'm trimming forward, or I can trim backwards if I want to go in the opposite direction. And right here you can see numbers telling me how many frames I've moved. So now I'm back where I started. If I start trimming forward, you'll notice when I'm doing that, if you watch down here, let's go back to where we were. If you watch down here, you'll see that this shot is in fact getting longer, this shot is getting shorter, but the places where this one started and the place where this one ended stay in the same spot. So I'm not changing the length of my movie or moving these clips relative to other clips. I'm just changing exactly what happens at that cut. Now maybe I get to this point and I say, I like how this looks. This is good, but we still got to cut a little bit more off the beginning of this shot. Okay, well, what I could do is I could click on the right side of this, and you'll notice now just the right side of this is highlighted instead of both, which I had before. These were both pink. Now just this one's highlighted. And down here, you'll notice instead of the cut kind of having these pink bars around it, zoom in on that so you can see, kind of pink on both sides. Now it has yellow. Now, if I see yellow, I should immediately be thinking, wait, yellow, that's a splice-in or insert. And the reason for that is if I change anything in this mode, it's kind of working in an insert sort of mode in that it's going to change the length of the movie. So if I move this cut a few frames forward, so I'm cutting a few more frames off the beginning of this shot, if I'm taking stuff off the beginning of this shot but not adding anything back in anywhere else, I'm shortening this shot. I'm not lengthening any other shots, so the whole movie is going to get shorter. So what I'm going to see is these later shots are going to start to creep earlier and earlier because there's less stuff in front of them. So as I do that, you can see what's happening. Those shots are getting earlier and earlier, and my movie's actually getting shorter. Right now it's a little above 50 seconds. I'm looking at this. As I trim this shot down, now it's a little below 50 seconds. So that's why it turned yellow, to tell me I'm now in an insert mode, meaning I can change the length of the film. Same thing if I was working on the other side. So let's say I want to leave this shot alone, but change this one. I could make the movie shorter, or I could make it longer, depending on which way I stretch this cut out. By the way, shortcut keys for this, very useful to know. I said to go into trim mode is U. It's the same button to go out of it. So that's a toggle in and out of trim mode. Towards the upper right where I have the P as in Paul button, I have P, left bracket, right bracket, and those are my toggles for what's happening here. So the middle of those three, which is the left bracket key, means cut on both sides. If I push P, which is to the left of it, I'm telling it just trim on the left side. If I push right bracket, which is to the right of the left bracket in the center, I'm cutting just on the right side. So I have P, left bracket, right bracket, P, right bracket, left bracket, switching between those modes very quickly. And then my trim controls, which I've just been doing with the keyboard, I'll show you, here's where they are on here. I actually like this a little better than the Premiere interface where it says plus and minus, which I always think of plus being adding and minus being subtracting, which is not always true here. Instead, you see it says trim left one frame or trim right one frame. So it's telling you which direction you're trimming, not whether you're adding or subtracting frames, because depending on how you're cutting, it might be one, it might be the other, it might be neither. Right now, if I move this, I'm moving to the left, but I'm not making my movie any longer or shorter because I'm affecting both sides. I'm shortening one side and lengthening the other. If I go to just the right side and I trim right, I'm making my movie shorter. If I was on the left side over here and I trim right, I'm making my movie longer. So you don't, that's why I like you don't see the plus or minus here. You just see whether you're moving the trim right or left, which is the important thing. You also have these, which are trim right and trim left. It says here 10 frames. What they really are is a third of a second. So if you're working in 30 or 29.97, it's going to be 10 frames. If you're working on a project that's in 24 frames or 23.98, these will say trim left 8 frames or trim right 8 frames. They're a third of a second in either case. Okay, so that's the basics of my trim tool. And one thing that is kind of cool about this is you don't have to cut just at the same cut. So let's say that, and this is one of those things that until you actually get into an edit, it's sometimes hard to see why you might want to do this. But let's say that I wanted to cut the video here and the audio here. I can do that. I'm just going to hold down Shift and kind of click on where the things are I want to cut. And you'll see now, if I'm trimming, it's moving the video cut in one place, the audio cut in somewhere else. You can even spread out the left and right side. So now if I'm trimming, you can see it's trimming the left side of the audio here, the right side of the audio here, and then the picture up here. So you have all sorts of freedom in how you want to set up your trim options. Or let's say I don't want to trim audio 2 track at all. I can just hit the 0 button, turn off audio 2, and now I'm just trimming audio 1 and video 1. So all kinds of options. All right, last thing, and I'm going to wrap up this intro video, and there's, again, other Avid videos that get into other aspects, but this was really just about the basics of kind of editing in the interface. Let me undo a couple of these things, get back to here. Okay, so you can, if you would like, grab clips here and move them around. So, in fact, let's just put a nice clean clip in there for us to work with. So I could grab this with my mouse and move it. Right now I'm in an overwrite mode, so if I move it, it's going to leave a hole there and just put the clip here on top of whatever was there. If I switch to an insert mode, I can grab it, and now it's doing it as an insert instead. It's a little hard to see that way. Let's do it like this. Let me get a gap, and then you can kind of see a little more what's happening. So you can see as I move that, it's kind of splitting up this clip 1/27-2 as I move this around. That's in an insert mode. And if I have both modes enabled, so I have this sort of split arrow here, it depends where I grab the clip. I'm going to stretch this out a little bit just so you can see it better. If I grab this clip on the top half of it, it's going to grab it in an overwrite way. If I grab it on the bottom half, it's going to grab it in an insert way. So it actually makes a difference where your cursor is, and you can see it changing as I go between these. That actually can be a very fast way to work, is to just leave both of these on and work that way. If you're not real precise with your mouse or trackpad, then it can be a little easier to just have one on or the other one. And again, you just have your E and R buttons to switch those. So E for the insert mode, R for the overwrite mode. And so it's very easy to just switch between one and the other if you need to do that. You'll also notice that these are moving, when I grab this, it was just moving the video and not moving the audio with it. I can toggle that. There's a linking toggle right here. It says link selection toggle. The shortcut for that is the semicolon. So I can turn it on and off. And if that's on, if I grab this, it's going to move that audio with it. If it's off and I grab this, it's going to move that by itself. I can always use Shift, just like you can in almost any program, to grab multiple things and say, I want to move all this stuff together like that. But usually it's handy to leave the toggle on, because most of the time you want to grab your audio with the video that goes with it and do that. And one last keyboard shortcut, because I've been doing it and didn't mention it, is your zoom controls. So I can zoom way out and kind of see everything scrunched together, but if I had a long movie, it allows me to see more of it. Or I can zoom all the way in down to like the frame level. That's my up arrow is zoom out, down arrow is zoom in. And while I'm on the arrows, I can use left and right arrow to just move frame by frame. This is not, I should mention, doing any editing right now. This is literally just moving the cursor. So the left and right arrows, in most situations that you would be in Avid, there might be some weird like sub effects functions and things where they might actually do something. But generally your left and right arrows are not going to actually do any editing. They're just for moving you around. Same thing if I'm up here on this source clip and I'm using my right and left arrows. I'm just moving frame by frame. It's not actually changing any edits or changing where an endpoint is or anything like that. Speaking of endpoints, you'll notice here, I always think these look kind of backwards. This is my in point, this is my out point, and the clip you're using is the part kind of between the flat edges. It always seems to me like it would make more sense if it kind of like enclosed it, like, in point like this, out point like this, which is how some other editors look. So just be aware, this is how they look in Avid. Here's in point, here's out point. They just kind of look a little backwards. You have some other controls with those too on your keyboard. So I mentioned, I to set an in point, O is to set an out point. I also have Q takes me to my in point. W takes me to my out point, so I can jump to one or the other. If I want to get rid of one of those, D as in dog removes my in point. F as in Frank removes my out point. And if I want to just get rid of both of them, G as in Gary removes both. So those are some simple commands with that. And my arrows, and there was one other keyboard shortcut. Oh, right. Sorry, we're a little off track here. If I go back into trim mode, so I'm at this cut right here, couple keyboard shortcuts in there to make your life work a lot faster. Is the A and S buttons will take you forward or backward to the next cut. So if I like trim up this cut how I want, that one looks good, just hit S, go to the next cut. That one looks good, go to the next cut. You can jump through your sequence very quickly. That works even when you're not in trim mode. The A and S buttons will always take you to the next or previous cut. And there are some options in the settings where you can set how you want to define that. So for instance, if you look here where the video and audio cut is offset a little bit, you can tell it, okay, do I want to stop at each one of these? Do I only want to go to certain tracks? So, only when there's a cut in the video or only when there's a cut in the audio, you can set all of those. But generally A and S, forwards and backwards to next cut. Back into trim mode. I talked about these. It's just worth noting keyboard shortcut for these are M, comma, period, and /. So kind of the bottom right section of the keyboard. So that's in order as they appear here. So M, comma, period, /. So looking down on the screen, M, trim backwards, third of a second, comma, trim backwards 1 frame at a time, period, trim forward 1 frame at a time, and /, trim forward a third of a second at a time. Okay, if you can do all those things, those are the basics of editing in Avid. We're going to get into some more functionality and stuff in class, but that should be enough to get you going and started working with footage and working within Avid and starting to put together sequences. Good luck.